Welcome to our first video of the mathematics series. We begin our discussion by looking at quadratic equations, which are generally on the first question on the Maths Paper 1 NSC exams. A quadratic equation is any equation that can be written in this following standard form: ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is not equals to 0, because when a equals 0, this term goes away, and then we'll be left off with a linear function, which is not a quadratic equation. So one of the unique ways to identify a quadratic equation, the highest power of x that exists on this equation is 2. Because if you look at this, we have x1 and then we have x2. The highest power that exists is x to the 2. The following is a graphical representation of the quadratic equation. The quadratic equation can exist in any of these forms, depending what a, b, and c are, which these values affect what are the x-intercept and the y-intercept of this equation. But for the purpose of this discussion, we won't really look at the detail on how to draw this, but perhaps when a bit later on our videos, we'll try, just in case that the majority of students do not understand how these are drawn, and then we'll get into the detail of that. So for these sections, generally they ask us either to determine the roots or they ask us to solve for x. So the roots of a function are basically x values that you substitute on your y equation such that your y is 0. So in other words, when they want the roots, they want the x-intercept. That's another word you can use. Notice that here I've used two values of x, and the reason being is that if you look, for instance, at the blue shape, which is also a quadratic function, this is a parabola shape. The maximum times this can pass the x-axis is 2 times, which is this point. So the maximum number of roots that can exist are only 2. So this is just a general example. So in this section, we'll learn techniques on how to solve for x or find roots. The first technique that we're going to use is factorization. And the second technique we'll use the quadratic formula, which basically immediately solves for our roots, or rather our x-intercept values of x. And then the last technique we'll look at is completing the square.